Вельмишановний пане генеральний секретар, дорогі друзі.
Dear Secretary General, dear friends, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome the delegation of the North Atlantic Council in Ukraine. Dear Jens, this hall is very well known to you. In September 2015, we held a historic first meeting of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, attended by the Secretary General of NATO. We pushed the envelope and demonstrated totally new approaches of both Ukraine and NATO to strengthening our mutual security. Today's visit of yours and the North Atlantic Council is deeply symbolic, and not just because this is happening on the 20th anniversary of signing of the Charter on a Distinctive Partnership between Ukraine and NATO, which was signed in Madrid at that time by the President of Ukraine and the then Secretary General of NATO, and at that time 16 allies. Now you have 29 allies. Over the last 20 years, you have demonstrated a good growth rate, and I think this is very symbolic that we emphasize this fact here in Ukraine now. This is also symbolic because for the last several days, Ukraine was visited by representatives of all the key institutions that bear responsibility for the security of the whole democratic world. Following today's meeting of the North Atlantic Council to Ukraine, in 2 days, we in Ukraine are going to have a Ukraine-EU summit, which is going to be also very symbolic because it's going to be the first summit after the completion of the ratification of the agreement on association between the EU and NATO. Finally, this has happened. We're very happy that this is happening right after the granting a visa-free regime for Ukrainian citizens by the European Union. These are tangible results of the cooperation which we have with NATO in the area of security cooperation, in the area of democratic reforms, which we have in our cooperation with the EU. Yesterday, right after the end of the G20 summit, we were visited by the Secretary of State of the U.S., Mr. Rex Tillerson, and yesterday we also had a visit by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres. All this means that the issues of European and world security cannot be successfully discussed or resolved without a direct participation of our country. And it is in this that the relations between NATO and Ukraine are especially important. Over the last 20 years, we have covered a long and very eventful way, marked with considerable achievements and at the same time numerous challenges. Today, we sincerely welcome representatives of the 29 allied countries and the countries of, I emphasize, the most efficient security alliance in the world, the alliance established after the Second World War, the alliance which continues to successfully develop. And I'd like to welcome the 29th member of NATO, Montenegro. We believe that your accession to the alliance is also deeply symbolic, and we are very happy to see you here today among the allies. I emphasize that the weight and role of NATO is increasing against the backdrop of modern challenges in the context of the developments around Ukraine. The ongoing Russia's aggression made it necessary for NATO to step up its activities. I can also even say that NATO kind of woke up and that provided a second wind for the alliance. The allies saw the necessity to pool their efforts for our shared security, the importance of sharing the burden of defense expenditures and an increase of their presence in the world. All that was taken note of in our country as well. That is why it is deeply symbolic that Ukraine today is welcoming our NATO partners as a country which has promulgated its course towards NATO membership as one of the priorities of its foreign policy. From this time on, our priority is integration with the Euro-Atlantic space, with the purpose of gaining membership in the North Atlantic Alliance. And it is very important that this decision is for NATO and the 29 allies. No other country, no other third country can have a right of veto or a permission for this cooperation. This is purely the will of the 29 countries and an individual country in question. I'd like to re-emphasize that we will apply immediately. We are not going to immediately apply for membership, because we need to develop our program of cooperation, speed up our efforts to reach necessary standards, and in this we need cooperation and support from our NATO partners. I emphasize that we stand ready for that. We have a very ambitious program for the reform of the security and defense sector, which was developed with the participation of our NATO partners, and we will implement the goal of these reforms, which is the attainment of standards necessary for membership. Reform and strengthening our defense capabilities is our first and foremost task at this phase. All this shows that we are firmly on the path which has already been covered by our neighbors who joined NATO over the last 20 years. 13 countries over the last 20 years of our partnership have become NATO member countries. I emphasize that we welcome them very much, and we look forward to further cooperation with the alliance with the view of building a strong and stable Ukraine committed to democracy and the rule of law, and strengthening the security and strength of the alliance and Ukraine. It is this kind of Ukraine that will be a prerequisite for European and Euro-Atlantic security. Thank you very much for your attention.
Short remarks, dear Mr. Secretary General. Please, Jens.
Thank you so much, President Poroshenko, and Petro, thank you so much for hosting all of us here today. As you said, last time I visited Kyiv, I attended a meeting of the National Defense and Security Council. This time I'm bringing the whole North Atlantic Council of NATO to Kyiv, so we can have a meeting in the NATO-Ukraine Commission. And we are so grateful for this opportunity to meet with you and also to have a meeting in the NATO-Ukraine Commission. And I think the meeting is yet another example of the close partnership and friendship between Ukraine and NATO. And today we will mark the 20th anniversary since the signing of a distinctive partnership between NATO and Ukraine. And the North Atlantic Council has traveled here to Kyiv to celebrate our unique friendship. We really value Ukraine's many contributions to the alliance over the past 2 decades. Ukraine is the only partner participating in all NATO missions and operations, including in Afghanistan and in Kosovo. We are also here to demonstrate NATO's solidarity with Ukraine and our firm support for the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of your country. Russia has maintained its aggressive actions against Ukraine. Ukraine and stand on your side. NATO allies do not and will not legal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea. And we remain concerned by the security situation in eastern Ukraine, which has already cost thousands of lives. The Minsk agreements must be fully implemented, and OSCE monitors be granted full, safe and unhindered access to the whole of Ukraine. Since 2014, NATO has significantly increased its support for Ukraine. At the Warsaw Summit a year ago, NATO agreed a comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine to help you provide for your own security and to help implement wide-ranging reforms in the security and defense sector. NATO will continue to support this ambitious reform agenda, which will make your country more democratic, more resilient and more prosperous. We commend Ukraine's progress in implementing these reforms despite very difficult circumstances and urge you to continue down this path. NATO is a friend of Ukraine, just as Ukraine is a friend of NATO. We believe that an independent, sovereign and stable Ukraine, firmly committed to democracy and the rule of law, is key to Euro-Atlantic security. So we welcome this opportunity to continue and to strengthen our partnership and friendship with Ukraine. So thank you once again for hosting us all here today, President Poroshenko. And that ends the public part of this meeting.